All right. Hello, everyone. I am so excited that we have so many people joining us for what I know is going to be an incredible discussion to talk about what's really on the event horizon, um, discussing the findings from the Omnipress 2023 Conference Industry Report. I know it says I'm Omnipress Webinars. I couldn't change that, but I am Tracy Grzybowski. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Omnipress. And I've been working with our team to develop this annual report since 2016. And this year, it was based on a data from a survey of over 200 event and industry professionals. Before we get started, I just wanted to go through a few housekeeping notes. First, this discussion is being closed captioned. So to access the closed captioning, I did put a link in the chat. Right now you can see a slide hopefully as well that also has this as a QR code. So if you want to follow along with the closed captioning on your mobile device, I'll leave this up for just another minute or so. Go ahead and scan the QR code. Otherwise, you can go ahead and click the link that I've put in the chat. You will have to open it up as a separate window, and it sits alongside the GoToWebinar screen. The panel discussion is also being recorded, and so it will be available for on-demand viewing on our website, which is omnipress.com/webinars. And then we will email a link to all of you within a day of the discussion once we have that all downloaded and captioned and ready to go. And we are going to be taking questions. We are reserving a Q&A portion at the end. I might interject with some of your questions as we go, depending on how the discussion's going, but we will leave time for Q&A. So what you can do is go ahead and just add your question into the questions window on the GoToWebinar. And finally, if you haven't seen the 2023 Conference Industry Report, which this discussion is going to be based on, I have uploaded it in the handouts. So you will see it in the handouts section of the GoToWebinar, so you can reference that. Once again, I know we've got a lot of people just joining. For those of you who are, just a reminder, this is being closed captioned, and so you can access that through the link in the chat or by scanning the QR code and looking at it on your mobile device. All right. Now, without further ado, let me see. Are people seeing camera? All right. You guys are still seeing the audience view. I'm not sure why. Okay. All right. Hopefully everyone can see all of us on your webcam. If you can't, please let me know in the comments. Okay, you are seeing the panelists. Okay, good. Sorry. All right. So I would like to introduce our amazing, amazing panelists, starting with Joan Eisenstadt. I do have my notes here because their bios are very impressive and I don't want to miss anything. She is the principal of Eisenstadt Associates, which is a Washington, D.C. based association, meetings, and hospitality consulting company. And she brings more than 45 years of experience working with organizations on everything from RFPs, meeting design, contract negotiations, risk and contingency planning, and training. I know she's also a huge advocate, and thank you for your voice, Joan, in making sure that meetings are accessible to everyone. She's also very active in ASAE, which is where I see a lot of her commentary, MPI, PCMA. She's an inductee into the EIC Hall of Leaders and was granted lifetime achievement as an educator by the PCMA Foundation. Next, we are joined by Beth Sermont, who is an FASAE, CMP Fellow, and CAE with 360 Live Media. She's got more than 20 years in corporate and nonprofit events and is currently the Vice President of Event Strategy and Design at 360 Live Media. She frequently speaks at ASAE, PCMA, MPI, and other industry events, and also hosts a regular design series called the Event Innovators Exchange. She was a finalist for Event Designer of the Year Award from PCMA. She was named to the inaugural class of CMP Fellows in 2022 and the 2022 ASAE Fellows class. She's also one of BizBash's 500 most influential people in events. So thank you, Beth. And last but certainly not least, Devin Montgomery Pasha, CMP, CED, and founder of DMP Creative, which is a firm that specializes in helping not-for-profits, associations, and institutions of all sizes reach their strategic goals through events. Devin also serves as the Director of North America for the Event Design Collective, which specializes in event design, education, and training in both the United States and Canada. And she's a big believer in purposeful and mission-driven events. She's been a featured speaker and volunteer for MPI, Academic Event Planners, and North Star Meeting Group. She earned her CMP from the Events Industry Council in 2020 and is a certified event designer that she earned from the Events Design Collective in 2021. So thank you all for joining us today and lending your incredible amount of expertise. There is a lot of ground to cover, and I know we could absolutely spend days talking about this topic, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So with this first question, I'm going to start with Joan. Now, 2023 is looking to finally be the year that events are returning back to in-person. But as they do, is it really, quote unquote, back to normal as we knew it in 2019 and before? Or do in-person events look different today? And if they do, how?
Thank you, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this. It's an interesting, and I also have to start with my disclaimer, which I have been advised by attorneys to do, which is these opinions are mine. They are not necessarily those of the clients with whom I work, so I will get that out of the way. What I think is interesting is that we talk about back to normal, and I don't know that there was ever a real normal in any of the meetings that any of us work on, certainly not with the associations for whom I help plan meetings. I think that we're in what I call the euphoria factor. Years ago, when I served on the MPI Foundation Board, we did studies about why people attend association meetings and why they attend corporate meetings. And one of the things that was consistent was what people called networking. And with further investigation, we found was really peer-to-peer learning. What I hear from clients all the time, what I heard especially in late 2020, 21, and into 22, was what people missed was the hug factor. They wanted to literally touch each other, shake hands, be face to face, not face to face through a screen. I think that there are realities that we'll talk about more throughout this program that will come to color the way we think about and how people decide to attend meetings. 2023 is still a new year, and we are still looking at how people are excited about seeing each other and how they may want to be together and to network in person. People met online, they interacted online, and now they're ready to come face to face. And I think that as we talk about some of the issues that I know that certainly the clients I work with are weighing, and I think others will want to weigh, that a lot of the things that I read in the report, and I appreciate very much having it, Tracy, it's very helpful to look at what people think about. I think that we're going to see some other issues. So I'm going to turn it back to you, or I can turn it right to Devin to jump in on this.
Yeah, Devin, why don't you go ahead and kind of elaborate on your thoughts on what you think in person looks like in 2023 and beyond.
Of course, and again, thank you so much, Tracy, for having us, and I'm so honored to be serving with these two stalwart panelists. As I said earlier in our call, I feel like I just got called up to the major leagues from my little minor league team to be serving on this panel. So thank you for having me. One of the things I actually heard recently is that in 2 years of the pandemic, we did 10 years worth of innovation as like a human race. And if you think about that, 10 years worth of innovation condensed into 2 years, the concept of going back to something in 2019 is almost like saying we're going to go back to something in 2012. And from that perspective, we can't go backwards to that because we've innovated so far past it, even though chronologically we may not feel it's been that long. We've learned the lessons of why events in 2019 may not have worked. We've learned that there was a lot of excess in how we did events and planned meetings in the early 2000s, where we had unlimited budgets, where we had unlimited staff, where there weren't supply chain issues. So the concept of going back to normal, I think, is something we all need to let go of. That is in the past, the same way that I no longer use a Walkman, and we don't take trains as often as we used to. So again, I mean, I still do, East Coaster, but it's like saying, it's like, man, I really miss cassette tapes. Like, that was wonderful and it worked and it was entertaining, but we have so many innovations past it that's no longer relevant. And so we, as a whole industry, whether you're on the planner side, the supplier side, or an attendee, need to think about where we are as an innovative human race and as an industry, and where we're going to go from here, having learned the lessons and innovated past it. I will also say that I think why events look differently is, to Joan's point, because we have realized all the inefficiencies and the deficits from events of the past, like not being inclusive, not honoring people's needs and meeting them where they are. Something as simple as closed captioning, something as simple as making sure all our dietary restrictions were met without someone having to feel like they were other for needing an accommodation. Addressing things like, sexual harassment at meetings, which was, it's a rampant part of our industry, but no one talked about it. Addressing mental health amongst planners, something that we didn't talk about. So with all of these things now being open and honest and frank conversations, this concept of going back is ineffectual. So I think moving forward, we have a positive outlook on how to be inclusive, on how to be aware of our surroundings, on how to be aware of the purpose of the meetings, and how to be aware of human-centric event designs that allow us to meet our ROIs and allow us to tailor every gathering we have to to our main stakeholders. I will say that at the Event Design Collective, we like to say that an event is a gathering of 2 or more people or groups of people that change behavior. And I think with that as a solid foundation to move forward from, it's asking ourselves, what behaviors do we want to identify to change, and how do we design experiences that do that?
That's a great point. I loved your quote about how much innovation happened just over 2 years of the pandemic, and it's just going to events with a very different filter. And I think we're going to get into a little bit more with some of our other questions. What exactly does that mean? How exactly do they potentially look different moving forward? We just addressed in-person events. So Beth, this next question is for you. Speaking of virtual and hybrid events, will those continue to be relevant in 2023 and beyond? We saw a lot of mixed messages in the report, really. Some people are sticking to them pretty steadfast. Some people might be dialing back what they were doing. Some people still aren't quite sure if they have the resources to properly support it. So what do you think is going to be the role of virtual and hybrid moving forward, and how might they look different than the events we held in 2020 and 2021?
Yeah, well, like everyone else, thank you for having me be here, and thanks for letting me be part of this panel. Devin, it's been great to meet you, and Joan, it's been a life goal of mine to speak on a panel with you, so I'm happy to meet that today, checking that box. But this question is so interesting to me, because asking if virtual and hybrid is going to be relevant is like asking, will content still be relevant going forward? And my personal view has evolved since 2020, and I was doing digital events well before 2020 actually, but it continues to evolve even to this day. And I think it starts with understanding that virtual and hybrid, those are not event models. Those are formats and channels for delivery. So, we're not having a hybrid event, just like you don't have a breakout session event, right? You don't have a general session event, you have an event. And there are different things that happen at that event that serve different needs for whatever the content's trying to accomplish, your organization's trying to accomplish, and of course, what the audience is trying to accomplish, which is the lens we should always be looking through first. And in terms of will they look different, they absolutely will look different. Just to echo a little bit of what Devin was saying before, 2020 and 2021 was sort of like the first days of television. And if you know what it looked like when they first started broadcasting TV, they pointed the camera at the radio announcer. And so if you think about that for just a moment, like that's kind of what we've been doing with our, one speaker on the stage or panel on the stage, camera in the back of the room. And it doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that there's so much more that's out there and so much more that we can do. And it's important to remember that different formats do different jobs, right? There's a reason why we put a speaker on a stage to deliver information to a mass audience without necessarily any back and forth dialogue, both in person as well as in a virtual space. There's a reason that we put people in a room together with small groups to have discussions, to work through problems, to connect with each other. And it's a different reason than having that speaker on a stage. And so it starts with really understanding what job does the content need to do, what job is the audience expecting it to fulfill, and then designing the event around that. And yes, that will mean sometimes there's a combination of a digital delivery as well as an in-person delivery. And I just want to add, because I'd be remiss if I didn't, one of the exciting things about the past couple of years is it did open us up to new audiences for all different types of reasons. We've alluded to access reasons, safety reasons, priority reasons. People couldn't always travel in person to our events. And a lot of those people still can't come back to our events now for reasons I think we might even get into a little bit more later on. And so if we want to continue to serve those audiences and capture them and deliver the great information that our organizations want to put forward, then we do have to think about multiple channels of delivery and crafting each one in the right way to convey what needs to be conveyed.
Okay. Sorry, quick follow-up question. This is me sort of interjecting on the fly. For that multiple channels of delivery, what are you seeing? Are you seeing that happen more within a single event or across? Are people looking at sort of their portfolio of events and educational offerings and determining which format works best?
Yes. Yes is the answer to that question. That's what's been so exciting to be in the strategy and design space right now is we are helping groups look at their portfolios and determining what makes the most sense across everything. And when you start to look at it in a holistic manner, you're thinking about everything, right? It's not just, are we putting this on, but it's what's the level of effort? How much money do we want to spend to ensure that we're getting the right return back? What makes it worth it for our organization to put that on? And so I'm seeing that kind of thinking at a portfolio level, but also at an individual event level, I'm seeing a lot of experimentation. I'm a big fan of PCMA. They do great things with convening leaders each year. This year, they had a great model of, they had in-person content that was more discussion-based. They had small stage content that was broadcast, and then they added almost like a news commentary where they had interviews, just like 5-minute interviews with all of the speakers so you could get a little bit more information from them. And it was a shorter period of time that it was available. It didn't run over the same hours of the event. Another model that I'm a huge fan of too is we call it a digital cohort model. And that's where you convene a small group of people. And by small, I mean like, 15 to 20 people around a piece of content for a short period of time, say 6 weeks. They meet every week, they have chances to interact with each other. That's a great way to set people up for success coming into an event, but also to take away and keep people connected after an event. So it's the world is a place of experimentation right now, and it's the way that the tools and the technology have changed in the past couple of years have allowed us more freedom to experiment with fewer barriers. So it's a great environment to be operating in.
Wonderful, thank you. Joan, do you have any thoughts to add to that? What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on what's
Well, I
happening?
do, and I'll tell you a couple of funny things that were funny to me that occurred that I hadn't thought about in a long time. We act as if virtual events are brand new, that they were invented in 2020, and I thought back to when I was president of our MPI chapter, the Potomac chapter. We partnered with the brand new Washington Speakers Bureau then. This would have been the 1980s. And they did something called First Tuesday, where we got to experience a new speaker. Some of those were done by satellite. And those were, for many of us, other than watching television, the first experience at a meeting with having a virtual component. What I think, and going back to what I said about the hug factor, I think that what happened when COVID became, when we were locked down, because it was, I traveled until March 12th of 2020. And so it wasn't until the 14th when everything in the country pretty much shut down. What people did was scramble to find an alternative delivery system. There were not a lot. The ones that existed were not accessible. And in fact, I would say way too many are still not even remotely accessible for people with disabilities. And what they did was to scramble to find something and then plan for 2021 with something different. Then as 2022 approached, people thought, well, maybe we can meet a little bit in person. And to Beth, your point, it was looking at some different solutions. What we've done, though, I think as a meetings industry, and certainly the association community, have gone from full everything to full nothing, back to, we have to go back to fully in person because it's too costly for us to do a virtual component. And so we haven't yet found, I think, as an industry and a community, that good sweet spot where people can still interact smartly. I think back to, don't everyone laugh at me, but the AOL chat rooms, where I was in one that was very active, and in fact, Harlan Coben, I'll drop names, who is now an incredibly famous author, was there. This was the early 90s. And so before he became Harlan Coben and Lights, we had workshops nightly on issues of writing. And then what I found was, because I traveled so much as I traveled, people wanted to get together. It's exactly the same today. People do want some interaction personally, and not everybody can. So I think that associations in particular have an obligation, as Beth said, to open this up to greater audiences, to be more inclusive, and the platforms have got to be better. That's the innovation, I think, Devin, that did not happen. They have not gotten considerably better. They're slightly better, but they are not inclusive. And I recommend to anybody who's listening now or later, if you're interested in more information on ableism and how to accommodate people, Jamie Shields, Shields, on LinkedIn has become my literal new best friend. He's in Northern Ireland, and he posts not only great information, but he also posts great graphics that people can use to understand how to be more inclusive of different audiences. So I think that what we have to do is, going back to Devin's point again, is the innovation has not happened in the way it should. And I think that the associations that continue to do some other delivery systems, channels, will be the ones who win out in terms of maintaining and gaining members and audiences.
Thank you, Joan. And can you repeat that name again? Did you say it's Jamie Shields?
Jamie, J-A-M as in Michael, I-E, last name Shields, S-H-I-E-L, D as in David, S as in Sam. And if you follow me, you'll see that I repost a lot of his information. And my plea, if anybody is traveling to Northern Ireland, I have a gift for him. It's a training packet that the post office is making very hard to send. So I'd be thrilled to give it to you to take. I wanted to ask President Biden, but I thought he might not be willing.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you for that reminder again, and just being the voice and the champion for accessibility in the meeting space, because it is so, so important.
For physical and virtual meetings.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Devin, we're going to move on to you with this next question. One interesting theme that emerged from this year's report is the idea of planning more purposeful meetings. What we found was that a lot of meeting planners that we've talked to, both in this survey and even just those that we talk to every day, felt like they kind of took too much on those past couple of years. And so now, instead of maybe increasing the footprint of the meeting, maybe decreasing it, so that the meeting itself is as effective as possible to help facilitate meaningful connections, deeper learning. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this idea. Are you seeing this type of shift, particularly in meeting design? And what does a purposeful meeting actually look like in practice?
Well, thank you, and for allowing me to field this question. And I think event design and getting more event designers out there. And for those who are unfamiliar with the concept, I will give a very simple metaphor, which is if I asked you to build a building, you'd probably call an architect before you call a construction team. So when you're thinking about designing purposeful events, event designers are the ones who help create the functional blueprints for the event itself, and then call in the planning team, or perhaps can serve two roles, but then give those blueprints to people whose skill set is in the planning and execution of the event itself. And by taking the time to plan, by asking the thoughtful questions to create that blueprint, that's the difference between a planned event with wished for results or a designed event that is in its core designed to get that return on investment. And I think with limited resources, limited human resources, limited financial resources, limited supplies, it's essential now more than ever to take 1% of that total event time to design it with your stakeholders in mind to get that return on investment. I think Beth, actually, you said it really well, where people are falling in love with the format of the meeting. So a lot of associations have, or have had in the past, the gala, the big gala for the donors, or the big gala for the fundraiser, or the big, and it's at the big hotel and it's fancy and you wear your black tie and you have some cocktails and a silent auction and a dinner and maybe some dancing. And we're like, oh, that's how you do that. So we fall in love with the format. For those of you who haven't read it, Priya Parker's book, which is on my desk at all times, The Art of Gathering. I see some nods. Like literally, it's always right here. But just gonna go get hers. If you don't have this book, please go get this book. And I am not being paid to say that. But this idea of purpose means to stop for a moment, to not go right to the format of the keynote and the breakout and the hybrid and the in-person, but to stop and ask, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of this gathering? What are we trying to achieve? And if learning and human connection is a part of that, then what we need to stop and do is think about, how do people connect? How do they learn? And one of the things that we talk about at EDCO is that there are 4 types of human learning. There's knowledge, skills, attitude, and people learning. So again, Beth, I think you said it really well. It's like, what do you want to have happen with this? And what is the method or format or delivery, as we would say, what is the experience journey that gives the instructional design, that gives that result? And I think that's really what a purposeful design is, instead of, we have to have a keynote and then we have to have some breakouts. And I think one of the other things that we realize is that humans have a limited capacity to learn in a day. And oftentimes, I think the model we have followed is, well, if a child can go to school from 8 to 3 or 9 to 5, and we work from 9 to 5, then the meeting itself should be from 8 to 3 or 9 to 5, and it should be literally managed down to the second with learning upon learning upon learning. And we cannot keep that much information in our heads in one day without breaks. And we have different energy levels throughout the day. One of the courses I found most exciting when studying for my master's was actually neuroscience. And it is learning how we as humans operate. How do we form memories? How do we learn and retain information? For those of you interested in a white paper, Janet Spurstad, who is a dear friend, and I see some nods there. Also, Beth, one of the 2020 inaugural CMP fellows, does a lot of work on neuroscience and uses that in her education method, and has written some white papers about how colors impact us as humans, how times of day and energy levels impact us as humans, how we feel fight or flight responses or reward responses, and utilizing that in your design to enhance that same thing, which is, what is the purpose of this gathering? What behaviors do we need to identify and to change? And what delivery methods or what experiences can we create in order to best do that? And I think in the past, we haven't taken the time to do that. And therefore, we hope for those results. And I think that's where we also get the stigma that meetings are just parties. You're all just fancy party planners. And my favorite line, you choose beautiful napkins. I was literally on a pub quiz team called Not Just Napkins, because it's so much more than what we do. But I think that's where the stigma comes from that C-suite and from our executives, is that you just plan really nice parties. Like, that's actually not what you want us to do. This is a strategic tool to be employed. So now I think that's also that 2023 and forward, is that you have to employ us, especially, you know, the designers and that thoughtful architect, to make sure the tool is employed correctly and gets the desired results.
Great.
Yeah.
And Devin, can you share that name again? You said it was Janet
Spurstad. It's Sperstad. She's also an event educator. I think she actually authored one of the PCMA textbooks that's used for European CMP exam. So I would highly recommend looking at some of her white papers. I think PSAB maybe did one of them, but it's really looking at the neuroscience of events. And it really, what it boils down to is, if you understand how we as human beings work and operate, it allows you to then create the most purposeful ways in which to gather, and the experiences which will impact them most wholly. And basically either leave the learning or leave the emotional reaction that you're looking for that give you that ROI.
Okay.
I want to jump in and add quickly to that, and that is that one of the innovations, if you will, it isn't really, but it is for the industry, that has happened in the last year or so, is to look into neurodiversity and how that impacts meetings. What has not been written yet, and I wish, if there's anybody in academia, Amanda Cecil, I'll call you out, listening to this, I wish there were a study done about how to create a much more inclusive of people with disabilities meeting. There are places that are doing it now, groups that are doing more, but not even remotely enough. And were this a different session, I could cite so many examples of exclusivity that hamper participation. And so if we are going to be purposeful, we need to be purposeful for the audience we have, the audience we want, and recognize that not everyone has the ability to attend the way we think they do and the way we plan. And we have to change that thinking.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joan. Beth, I guess if you want to jump in with some of your comments on your thoughts on what it means to have a purposeful event.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, 100% to everything that Devin and Joan just shared. And you know, what I would add to it is, when we're looking at event design with our clients, so one of the things that we do is we help our people reimagine and reinvent their events, and purpose is where we start. And we start by saying, you know, the event should be more than just the coming together of your community. It should serve to advance both the mission of the organization as well as advance your industry in whatever sector you happen to be in. And so one of the questions we look at is, what can happen that can only happen here with this unique group of people coming together? What can they do that no one else can do? And it's a matter of us being together, you know, in the same place physically or virtually. I love the purpose argument too, because it's really the North Star. You know, if we look to the scrambling time, you know, of 2020, the organizations that did well were the ones that knew what their event was about. You know, and it wasn't just, oh, it's a family reunion, or oh, it's a party, or oh, it's whatever. It was, no, we're here to serve this audience with these types of things. And their overall process was a lot easier. And, I'm intrigued by both, Tracy, how you started, and then Devin, you added to it. Tracy, you talked about, event planners have taken so much on, right?
Mhm.
And, whether we wanted to or not, that's where we are. It seems like every day there's a new thing to be taking on. But, Devin, you talked about the strategic view. And I think, not only do we need to recognize that, there's a strategic seat at the table, but we need to claim that strategic seat at the table.
Yes.
When you think about how much resources and revenue go on to putting on even a small event, imagine if you went forward to your CEO or even your director of such and such and said, hey, I need $250,000 and about, I don't know, a couple thousand hours of man time, person time to, just do this thing. And they're like, okay, well, what's the outcome going to be? What are you going to accomplish with it? Oh, we're just going to have a big party. That's not going to fly. So it's about understanding both, what are the very real financial and strategic ROI initiatives that come from the event, but also how are people just generally going to be better because they've interacted with you in your community in some way, shape, or form. And all those things I think are really important to be bringing forward.
Excellent.
And if I could just, sorry, Tracy, just jump in with like a closing, is to wrap that up, is one of the questions we actually need to start asking is, what happens if we don't do this as an event? And I hate to be like, don't do the event. It doesn't make us superfluous, but when we think about relevancy and resources and strategy, is what can be like, what would be accomplished if this was not a meeting? Could this be accomplished without the meeting or the event? And it's taking all of those gatherings, all of those meetings of 2 or more people in the whole strategic calendar and rethinking them as a continuum versus taking each of these as sort of individuals, and asking, if there's multiple purposes, can these be combined? Can they be joined? And really starting, I think Bethany said it best. It's like, it's rethinking and reimagining, and it's allowing ourselves to be creative with, let's slice and dice it. Let's turn it on its head. Let's make it backwards. Let's stretch it out. Let's compress it. And all of that has to be part of the conversation. And it really does include the brave question, which is, we often call it the 4th prototype, is what happens if you don't do the event? And I think that those are part of the strategic conversations, and being as bold as that is what's going to get us that seat, not just in the room with these decision makers, but at the table to push back and say, we're not the party planners who are going to take this as your lunch order and ask you if you'd like fries with that. It's putting us at the table so we can hear the entire strategy of the year, so we can see where gatherings of any kind would be successful in moving us forward.
Great. And I think it's going to be important for everybody who's listening to kind of just bookmark this piece of the conversation just a little bit right now while we get into our next piece, because I think a lot of this may address some of what we're going to ask in this next question, which I'm going to direct to you, Joan. What are you seeing some of the top challenges that meeting planners are dealing with right now? And, do you have any inspiring stories of how some organizations are addressing them? I'm sure the list is long, longer than we have time for.
The list of challenges is tremendously long. The list of inspiration is less long. And I would say, let me start with inspiration. What I saw during what I'm going to call the worst of COVID, and I need to do a qualifier. I got emails yesterday from 2 meeting planners, both of whom got emails after they were on site for their meetings that people had reported. There's no reporting now in most cases to say that somebody got COVID at the meeting. They, however, had people report, and they got the notices, and both of them sent them to me, saying that they hope that they're protected because they're vaccinated, but it's still a challenge. It is not gone. Florida just reported there is yet a new subvariant that's causing conjunctivitis, which would not be something you'd want to have people get at a meeting. So challenges. The inspiration is that people did look differently at their strategic planning. They began to see that meetings were a vital part of what they did. And they began to look again at purpose, at budget, at staffing, at what it meant if they didn't have it, what would it meant if they delivered differently. The challenges go beyond that, and the challenges seem to be hitting literally every day. I worked with a client to revise, and this is one of the inspiring stories, to revise their RFP for their citywide meeting so that it reflected their DEI policies. During COVID, DEI became a much greater issue. It never wasn't, but it became much greater. And so for people to align where they go, how they go, what they present, who presents it, how they include people, has become one of the greatest challenges I'm seeing clients face. And so for me, the duty of care issues with some of the laws being passed. The ones we frequently talk about are the issues around abortion being limited, which also limits health care for pregnant people. And so if you have someone at a meeting who has an emergency pregnancy and they can't get care, it becomes a huge challenge. It becomes a life-threatening challenge, and it becomes a challenge for them considering even going to the meeting. One of the other issues, there was a report, I think we were watching PBS NewsHour, about a lot of the gun laws in states, and a lot of us have planned for our meetings and our emergency plans around active shooter situations. What the new laws being passed are saying is there's no requirement for a license, it's open carry. And so to me, that's another challenge that we face in the care of people coming to our meetings. And I think we have to consider and continue to look at the remote workforce. The statistic I saw it was the April 12th New York Times Magazine section on remote work, work from home, and so on, said that from 2019 to 2022, I think 2022, the number of remote workers went from 2% to 11%. So we know that they're going to be in a different place to be attracted to meetings. There are so many challenges, and Devin, when you talked about the issue of party planner, I have, for more years than I can tell you, taught that meeting planning is more than brain surgery or rocket science. If I hear anybody ever say that, I correct it immediately. We're responsible for, in some cases, tens of thousands of lives. And we have to be purposeful. We have to look at the way we develop and deliver, the channels on which we deliver that Beth talked about, how we ensure that those challenges can be met and not push them aside.
Absolutely. You are so right. And I think kind of tying the 2 points together, really starting with that discussion of purpose and sort of reverse engineering the event is a lot of, okay, then how are we going to drive these people here? Even that article you shared with us today, Joan, that talked about how business travel is still down and not necessarily expected to come back. It's a huge mountain to climb to get people to come back to meetings, which is why it's so important that they do have that purpose.
Yeah, one last thing on that, and that is that if someone lives somewhere where their employer, especially if it's a state employer or a state funding, won't fund to go to certain other states, then people are going to say, do I? And some clients right now are counting on people taking their own money and their vacation time to come to a meeting to get their continuing education credits. And are people going to continue to do that when it becomes a hardship financially, when they know that the airlines may leave them stranded overnight or 2 nights, and they don't get to the meeting? So I think that we have to look at, we have to be, as planners, much different in how we look at the world than we ever have.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I am kind of keeping an eye on the time, and so I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit to serve this next question to you, Beth. What role do young professionals, also known as Gen Z, play in the future of events? And how might events need to evolve to attract and retain them?
Yeah, it's a great question. Lots of things to think about with this question. And so, I'll start with, as of the beginning of this year, half of the US workforce is under the age of 45. So let's just look at that. That's a huge reality. These are the people that we want to bring both as members to our associations, but certainly to come and attend our events. And there is a significant difference in the people under 45 and the people over 45. I'm right there. I will be 45 in about 2 weeks, actually. And I am what they call a cusper. I had an analog childhood and a digital adulthood. And the point is, though, that my school, my growing up, didn't look that much different from my parents in terms of how we got information, at what speed we got information. Very similar when we think about it in that way. When I look at my kids, it's a completely different world with a completely different set of expectations for access, what it should cost, how long it should be, when they should get there, privacy. All of these models are very different for anyone who grew up with the internet in their house, let alone in their pocket. I mean, to keep kind of going on this theme we've got here of like old technology, it's the difference between going to the library and using the card catalog to look up your information as opposed to pulling out your phone, and just looking it up, from your pocket. So the thing to think about here is that the models that we used, in some cases, they are more than 100 years old. They are built on the paradigm of education as it has gotten us up to this point. And to, I think, build on everything that both Devin and Joan have been saying, it doesn't mean that they're bad, but maybe they're not serving us in the same way that they were serving us previously. And what else do we need to add to it? And it can be hard, right? Things that are different from the way that I learned them. I don't have that model just like easily in my back pocket. So I have to go out and look for it. Right? I have to talk to my attendees. I have to do the research. I have to look at the white papers and really understand not only how do adults learn and what's the right way to think about that, but how are we teaching kids now? And what are they going to expect in 15, 25 years when I want them to come pay money or their employer to pay money for them to be at my event? And, there's a little bit of this conversation when I have it with my clients. It's a little bit of like, oh, kids these days, they don't, a little bit of that grumbling that does come up. But here's the thing to remember about kids these days and this younger workforce. I don't have a single client, and I work across all sectors, construction, healthcare, banking. Every single one of them is experiencing both a workforce crisis as well as a pipeline crisis for their membership. We don't have enough people coming in to do the jobs that our associations want people to do. And then they're not joining the membership because it doesn't occur to them that it's something that they should do. It's not in their purview of understanding. And so focusing on bringing these people in and doing what we do best as associations, right? Upskilling, reskilling, training people. I'm always fascinated by, if you're in computer science, and you enter as a freshman, by the time you graduate as a senior 4 years later, everything you learned is obsolete, right? And so, what do? Well, you either take classes to figure it out, or why not come to this event that's going to tell you everything that you haven't, learned in the past 6 months? Why don't you come be a part of this digital, conversation cohort? It's going to be super streamlined. It's going to give you a certificate that's going to get you up to speed. And this is what the employers are looking for. Over and over again, we're hearing from CEOs that people graduating from college, they don't know how to do the work. We have to train them. This is a gap that the association space can fill as well as the event space can fill. So it's really something that we should be thinking about.
Absolutely. And I think a big challenge is going to be, the conference and associations aren't really the default anymore. There are so many other sources of knowledge, information. My daughter taught herself how to tap dance for an audition after watching a video on YouTube for 1 hour, and nailed the audition. It's like, so how do we let them know that the conference is an option and something that they should be really thinking about?
Absolutely. And just to double down on that point, so I work in a lot of the healthcare space. I interview doctors about why or why not would they come to this event. What I've heard an increase of over the past 18 months is there is now so much free, high quality continuing medical education. I think, Joan, you made the point earlier. I don't need to get on a plane to keep up my certification or my licensing. I can get everything I need right here, and I don't have to waste time or effort or money. And if I run a private practice, by the way, I'm not getting paid if I travel to the event. So in terms of, yeah, it exists and it's free and they're coming to take all of our lunch from us. So it's, you know, if you want to survive this, you can't ignore it. We have to be strategic, think about the purpose, think about what we can do differently, and really create these models to help our people get to where they want to be.
Absolutely. Devin, I wanted to get your thoughts on this as well.
Yes, I think I represent the elder millennials on this thing. So still had an analog, though slightly shorter childhood. Digital came in still as a young person. I think Mark Zuckerberg and I are actually the same class year, 2006, from college. So I am dating myself. But point being is that you know, it's interesting to see, you know, that sort of grumbling about kids these days, or looking at helicopter parenting. I think, like, as a parent, we look at how do we get our kids to a certain place, but is it the same thing, like the place where I am, or is it a place where we think they need to be in order to be prepared for the future? I think the big thing about that is screens. You know, are you a screen parent or a non-screen parent? And like, well, that's the difficult thing. How many screens and how many options are you going to have for a younger person? But they need to be digitally literate. And I think these are the types of questions that we're struggling with, to Beth's point, is we cannot think about things as the way we did them. We have to be innovative. I think one of the biggest things about Gen Z is that when we start to understand them, it's that, one, things do have to be more instant, and they have to know the value of that investment within 2 minutes of hearing it, because they can just as quickly move on to the next one and just as quickly move on to the next one. So this idea of getting and capturing their attention with a message has to be so fast and so immediate. I think that's where a lot of us struggle, because we're used to reading a little bit longer, or going and searching, or listening to the pitch. The other thing is that this generation sees that success can be had without the traditional path. And that's, I think, the biggest difference between us, is that I don't have to start as a freshman and then go to sophomore and go to senior. I can start my business as a sophomore, leave college, and become the CEO. I can, you know, find a cool idea or become an influencer or a TikTok star, and none of that requires this traditional path where you start as the program manager and get promoted to assistant director and associate director, or, you know, the junior league model of first you become the treasurer and then the secretary. And, you know, this idea that you have to pay these dues to get to this point, because they've seen an entire generation skip the steps and go right to the end. And I think that's where a lot of your association models, a lot of this membership model, a lot of this education model becomes different, because they don't see the need to pay the dues. So especially, you know, I'm working on designing event industries for events professionals and asking them the same thing. We're asking you to join an industry where you probably won't get paid that much, and you're going to work a lot of hours, and you're going to end up playing misery poker with a lot of people based on these stories and experiences. But come on down anyway and join us, because it's super fun. It's, what is the message there? And how do we reframe that message to, your natural inclination is to be passionate about this. How can I harness your natural inclination and passion and power, and give you the skills to be powerful and impactful within this industry? And it may not look the same. And I think that's where we have to go back to this idea of purpose, and this idea of what is outdated, and how do we reframe in order to be impactful to this generation, which is used to instantaneous gratification, because they can literally pick up any device at any second and get gratified. The only other thing I'll add is that this generation is also had the most accessible to negative information. So every natural disaster, crisis, financial crisis, you know, just, you know, every horrible thing that we see now on TV and on Instagram and on Twitter, they have access to that and are impacted by it. And I think that we need to reframe in a way where we say, you know, how do we tell you you're going to be in a safe environment? How do we give you a sense of belonging without that anxiety and fear of all that could go wrong? And I think it really requires us to use a skill which is not taught anymore, which is empathy. And really starting to go back to not what is the hard skill, which, again, to Beth's point, associations are great for skill learning and knowledge learning within your industry where you are passionate. we need to go back to people learning and attitude learning, which is how do you have empathy for this group? How do you understand them in a way that will get you to do the desired behavior, which is we need Gen Z to join the workforce. We need Gen Z to join associations. We need them to want to have leadership positions, but to not put 10 years worth of slogging away towards where they might want to be, which is the president or director or VP. And through that empathy, we'll find a way to incorporate them into the workforce and braid them with the older generation that expects how they came up. And I think that's where we all need to be across industries right now. But I'll speak to the meeting industry is taking a step back and saying, we need you and we want you and you're valuable. How do we reframe how we've always done it to get you to be a part of it as well? And again, harnessing that natural inclination, whether it's healthcare, computer science, not-for-profits, startups, or even our own industry. It's, clearly if you're thinking of talking to me, you're interested. So where can we have that conversation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we could have a whole conversation just on that.
Probably.
So what's everybody doing tomorrow? Just kidding. We are, if you can believe it, the hour is already nearly flown by, and I want to make sure we leave time for questions. So first, I just want to remind everybody who's listening, if you do have a question for the panelists, go ahead and pop it into the questions, and I'll be taking a look at those. But this last question, I want to go around for each of you. 30-second soundbite for each. And Joan, I'm going to start with you. What's one thing you're keeping an eye on in the event industry right now?
I think the most important thing is for planners to be open and curious and aware, and to then connect the dots of everything going on in the world and in our own country, whatever country you live in, to how that impacts both the supply chain, the staffing, the duty of care to those who come to your meeting, as well as the purpose, as well as the delivery channels.
Wonderful. Thank you. Beth, same question to you.
Yeah, I'm always paying attention to the eyes of the audience, looking at every single decision through the audience eyes. And that's everything from how are they learning to are they getting what they need? Do they feel safe? Or is everything accessible to them? Whenever you have a doubt about the right way to go, look through the eyes of your audience. It will point you in the right direction.
Great. Devin, your final thoughts.
I look at design in terms of being a strategic tool and really allowing our industry to take its place at the table. And I'm really looking forward to seeing more and more how we're moving away from reactive order takers to proactive, trusted advisors, and really taking a step towards being in the room and utilizing and respecting the human resources and time it takes to produce these pivotal moments of change for our industries. And for our organizations, and really promoting sort of past that stigma. And I think that we're finally taking the baby steps to get there. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how innovative and creative organizations utilize these very talented professionals to help meet their goals by employing this in a more strategic way.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great thoughts, great discussion. So I've got a question for the group. So Craig says, I have authors and scholars, and they want more time to meet each other and chat. I was thinking of some semi-planned meet and greet events, some brief ones, perhaps during lunch. Any ideas for this sort of thing that might work with a group who wants some help, but not too much?
My first inclination, and I don't mind is maybe to do the unconference model. I think there's a couple of creative ways where you can allow them on site to sort of claim that unconference time, and I'm sorry, I'm blanking on that second term for what that unconference format is, but to allow each of them to sort of put up the topic they would like to cover and having people flow in and out of conversations based on their executive function at the moment, their attention span and where their energies are, and kind of finding the right fit for them, but also allowing people to speak on their passion points and topics. And I think you'd find some really interesting chemistry through an untraditional format.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll yes and on that. I love that idea. And I'll just add, people are terrible at knowing what they want. So I know what they're saying that they want. So sometimes we have to like sort of sneak their vegetables in, for them, ground the broccoli up in the brownies or whatever. But this is an opportunity to leverage hybrid as well. And I'll use a book club model as an example. When you think about a book club, you don't sit in the room and read the book together. You read the book on your own and then you come together and discuss it. So think about, models where that information is presented ahead of time, but then when they're together, they're having the conversation or the questions or the deep dives.
Wonderful. Joan, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, except that what's interesting, Beth, about what you just said is that we use that format using the book by Dan Pink, A Whole New Mind, which remains for me one of the seminal books on how you can change education and make it for all kinds of learners. And we used it for PCMA. In fact, we did a number of book club sessions that were incredibly successful and very different. And in fact, from Dan's book, he was kind enough to give me the cards he developed. We blew them into posters, so we had more thinking around the room. There are lots of ways that we can rethink how people interact and to reconsider the introverts and the extroverts, and to reconsider the people whose abilities may be different so that we can ensure that they too can participate.
Absolutely. And thank you earlier for bringing up the topic of neurodiversity, something that is very near and dear to my heart as the mom of an autistic kiddo, starting to see more chatter around that and very appreciative of that thought process as well. So, okay. Last call for any questions from the group. I think what we've done is given people a lot of things to think about. So I really appreciate your time, the three of you, Devin, Joan, and Beth. Thank you so much for joining me on this. Again, this will be recorded and we'll be sending it out. And I can't wait to see what the data tells us, how things progress this year and what the data tells us when we do this survey. We open the survey at the end of the year and it goes through the beginning of the year, and then we produce the report. And I'll be really, really curious to see what it tells us is happening this year and what people are predicting for the future. So I look forward to this discussion. What are you guys doing April 25th, 2024?
Calendar.
It would appear that Beth and I will have to find out for sure, but we both have birthdays coming up. So we may be available, but we expect a cake. I don't know.
All right. Sounds wonderful. I will make that happen.
I'm on it.
Thank you.
I'll bring the cake.
Thank you all again for joining me. I appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who joined in on the discussion online, and I really appreciate your time and your expertise. Thanks, everyone.